Welcome to the next version of Voices of Sample Management. Today I have my friend and colleague, fellow product manager at Titian, Marcus Oxer. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Toby. Yes, I'm Marcus Oxer, and as you just said, I'm a product manager at Titian Software, so part of the product team. This month, so I'm celebrating my 12th anniversary at Titian, which has gone remarkably quickly. But prior to Titian, which seems like a long time ago now, I was a scientist at GlaxoSmithKline. I originally started there as a bench scientist, as a molecular biologist, so I worked in the lab for the first probably 6 or 7 years, and then I sort of moved more into the IT side of things. So I was working initially in bioinformatics and then later on in R&D IT. So always staying in touch with the science, but moving progressively more into the sort of IT side of things. So yeah, joining Titian from there was a logical step. Titian was a company we were working with a lot, and of course I still, from time to time, get to talk to my old colleagues back in my former pharma days.
Cool, thank you. So with the idea of this podcast is to share the knowledge of sample management, but also observations of what happens in the outside world. There's a lot of focus on sustainability and the carbon neutral world that we were all supposed to be aiming for. So we thought we'd have a discussion about how this is important, but also how sample management can help with that journey. So with things like COP23, COP24 happening, lots of horrible TV programs of sea turtles with plastic bags around their head, etc. It's getting more and more important in people's minds, and whether that leads individuals to reuse their plastic drinking cup or turning off lights, all these things are good, but more importantly, what's the big pharma companies actually doing? Marcus?
Well, indeed. I mean, it's a huge topic, isn't it? I mean, it's in our faces the whole time on radio, television, the internet. There's big pharma companies and also academia are doing a lot in this area. We know that AstraZeneca, for example, has this huge ambition zero carbon strategy where they're aiming to eliminate their CO2 emissions, be carbon neutral by 2025, which is a huge ambitious target to aim for. GSK, my former company, want to do 100% renewable energy by 2025, including imported and generated, and I'm sure the other big pharma have similar goals. On the academic side, I know there's this UCL, which is a University College London, one of the biggest universities in the UK, have this laboratory efficiency assessment framework, which is LEAF as an acronym, and that tries to look at all areas across an organisation, the laboratory organisational structure, including equipment management, recycling, procurement, with the aim of just driving down energy consumption and increasing sustainability, reducing wastage, and all those sorts of things. And I know there are other universities who've created their own pledges. University of Leeds, I think, were aiming to be plastic free on their campuses by 2023. So yeah, there's a lot going on in these different industries and academia.
So I suppose the world of sample management, it might be quite hard to figure out how we can help this process. We all have lots of plastic tubes with barcodes on, disposable tips, etc., and lots of laboratory freezers. Maybe we should start with something as energy using as a laboratory freezer.
Yeah, so freezers, I mean, it's astonishing really just how much energy a freezer uses. I mean, we're talking in laboratory, we're frequently talking about minus 80 freezers. Of course, to get down to those sorts of temperatures, inevitably it's a lot of energy usage. And typically they use something like close to, I think it's 7,000 kilowatt hours a year, which if you break it down, it's about as much as a house consumes.
And that's a house per year, basically.
Yes,
in your lab.
Yes, so it's like having each freezer represents the energy usage of a whole house in terms of electricity. And of course, companies have dozens of these. Many large companies have many dozens of freezers. So it does really represent a huge carbon footprint potentially. Now, obviously, you can offset that to some extent by using renewable energy where you can, but still, better would be to get away with fewer freezers if you can, and reduce your freezer footprint.
Okay, so I suppose that leads nicely into sample management software could potentially help. Indeed.
And actually, we mentioned AstraZeneca earlier and their sort of zero carbon targets. And there was somebody I met at AstraZeneca who was talking to me about this very subject, and he was very aware that they have a lot of freezers, and was very much aware of the impact that must be having, both in terms of financial cost, but also carbon cost. And the conversation was all about tracking, knowing what's in those freezers, because it's very possible that, as I say, I was a bench scientist, I know this. You have freezers, they fill up with things, and you don't necessarily know what's in there and whether it's okay to dispose of it. It might be something really important, so you don't want to get rid of it. So the simplest thing is just buy another freezer. We do the same sort of thing in our houses, don't we? We tend not to throw things away. We accumulate. It's easier to accumulate things than sort of declutter. And it's the same with lab freezers. So unless you've got a really good idea of what's in your freezers, it's hard to keep on top of your disposal regimens, and that's where sample management, of course, can help, because if you can properly catalogue everything that's in your freezer, and perhaps even do things like assign expiry dates, or at least review dates, so something needs to be reviewed. Is this project still relevant? If the project's closed, you can consider whether to dispose of it, and free up all those spaces for new samples without having to resort to buying more freezers.
And running them, of course, yes.
Yes. Yeah. So generally, so getting by with fewer freezers clearly is going to be a huge benefit. And some things, some samples just have a shelf life that beyond which you don't want to keep them anyway. But if you're not tracking that and regularly reviewing it, then it's it's hard to do that. You don't want to be digging through your freezers looking for samples. But if you can just do a search and say which of my samples have expired and where are they, and then go and pick them out. Obviously, that's a much easier proposition than trying to figure it out with a spreadsheet and or just go digging around in a frosty freezer.
Okay, cool. Of course, even a software system needs power to run, so we're at Titian not immune to this process. But what can a software company like us do?
Well, one way is to sort of go with economies of scale. So by using external hosting rather than trying to run software in a local data center, can have a dramatic effect on total energy consumption. So obviously Titian uses Amazon Web Hosting, which means that you can be optimizing your compute usage. It scales according to your usage, but also lots of the AWS hubs that we use for hosting can be run on renewable energy. And indeed, we seek to use the ones that are run on renewable energy to help with everyone's carbon footprint concerns. Because obviously, you know, these companies that are trying to reduce their carbon footprint, that does extend across their whole value chain. So including the providers of software services as well, which Titian may be one.
So yeah, I suppose, you know, we've covered a bit of what Titian does as the automation product manager. I suppose we should probably have a quick discussion on what the other vendors are up to. So they're having done a bit of Googling and talking to partner vendors. It's interesting that most of the big companies, the Beckmans, the Tecans, etc., have similar goals to the big pharma. They're all big companies, and they have shareholders who care about the future of the world. So there's obviously a good incentive to do it. For instance, Tecan aims to use 100% renewable, just like GSK, by 2025. Beckman have reduced their non-hazardous landfill by 73%, and that was in 2021. And lots of their plants in San Jose and Indianapolis use 100% renewable energy. And you know, even the small companies such as, you know, Zayas reduce their carbon emissions by half by sticking solar panels on their roof of their facility, and actually pay, you know, offset per year to cover the rest. So even the smaller vendors are doing their bit. I also know Zayas are very focused on using unlabeled packaging, so it can be reused easily. It can be recycled easily. So they're going even another step. None of their packaging comes with Zayas stamped on the side. It's just got a sticky label on it, which can be removed easily. Okay, do you think there's anything else we should bring up?
Yeah, so we sort of talking about automation, because we're starting to stray into the, you know, we've been talking about energy usage, and we're now sort of starting to cross over into the topic of plastic usage, because of course all these petting operations use tips and plates and so on. You know, and usually when you talk about trying to minimize your impact, you think about things like reduce, reuse, recycle. Not very easy with laboratory plastics, because reducing is one option. You can do things like try and minimize the number of plates you use by either using sort of scaled down formats, more wells, more densely packed wells, or potentially, you know, running more assays on the same plate, you know, things like multiplexing, or you know, making sure you are not running partial plates. And that's something that obviously Mosaic has an assay request queue to help you do exactly that sort of thing. So you can only plate out items when you have sufficient to plate onto full plates, so avoid partial plates. And that can, you know, as well as reducing the number of plates you're using, of course, that can have other knock-on effects, such as time saving. So you're saving on time and equipment, which could have a carbon impact. If your plate's being prepared externally, which is often the case, you have bigger companies often have CROs preparing these assay plates for them. You're potentially reducing the shipping burden as well, fewer plates. And then you know, recycling always been a challenge. I mean, going right back to my years at pharma industry, you know, I remember when everything was glass and we used glass pipettes and glass flasks and so on. And used to have a very nice man who used to come around and collect all the glassware. I remember him particularly because he was a very friendly chap, seemed to love his job, and his job was to come and collect the glassware, wash it, autoclave it, return it to the labs, and that was the norm. And then we gradually switched over to using plastics. And I remember even at the time I thought, this just seems incredibly wasteful. We're filling bins with plastic pipettes. during the day, and then go off to be again autoclaved before disposal, presumably either landfill or incineration. And I think there is now a recognition that sort of model of plastic usages has got to sort of come back a little bit. And I talked a bit earlier about the different academic frameworks for reducing plastic usage, and I know the University of Leeds, for example, have been looking in their labs and seeing what alternatives they can find. And it is, ironically, some of the things going back to glass, so glass Petri dishes rather than plastic Petri dishes. But things like weighing boats for weighing out powders can be paper rather than plastic. But generally, one of the problems with plastic is you can't easily recycle it. It generally does have to go for incineration or landfill, because by definition it's probably contaminated. And even if it's not contaminated, it's just been used for some fairly benign solutions, such as glucose solution. Most recycling companies, I think, would treat it with some suspicion if it's come from a laboratory.
Yeah.
There are some companies out there starting to appear that are looking at washing and reusing plastic labware, which is a very interesting development. It'll be interesting to see if that really does take off as another option for reducing wastage.
Yeah, I've heard of plasma cleaners and things like that. It's interesting technology, and I think a few of the pharma have tried, but yeah, I haven't actually heard of positive or negative yet. But hopefully it will evolve.
But it sounds like the right sort of thing, doesn't it? At least to sort of investigate these options. It's difficult to imagine you can have a 1536 well plate in glass, for example. But you could imagine, it might be possible to find a way of reusing those plates.
Yes, that would be the ideal. Yes, the utopia.
Because the other thing worth mentioning, I suppose, I mentioned pipette tips, and of course, there are now a plethora of tipless dispensing liquid handling options. So that's another way of reducing plastic usage by not requiring tips at all.
Yes, or at least minimising. Some dispensers don't need to change the tip each time. You can load it up and reuse the same tip for quite a while.
Yeah.
So there's different technologies out there. It's not just the acoustic dispensers. It's SPT type machines, also dragonflies and things use a different type of pipetting, so they can do multiple dispensers from the same tip. So yeah. So interesting times ahead, but it's obviously important.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Marcus. That was good. And thank you, audience, for listening to the latest Voices in Sample Management. See you next time.
Thank you, Toby.